Well, sir, how are you? Okay, let's have a go at this. It's been long in the making and in the discussion, I think, back and forwards, I sort of get a bit lost in sometimes I feel like I need more guests. Then I go, you know what? Fuck it. Just keep talking about what you're talking about. And then it goes, back and forward. But anyway, here we are.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Well, first of all, it's a pleasure to be here with your good self. And yeah, very happy to be on your channel, man. I'm sure I've mentioned this to you before, actually, but I think it was a culmination of both listening to yourself and to Jackie, our mutual friend
Oh
from Into
yeah.
the Necrosphere. That actually prompted me to want to start Ableist Manifestations. Because obviously, prior to that, I was all into the Joe Rogans of the world and everything else that was out there, but I
Sure.
never saw anything that kind of connected with the underground. So yeah, it's I guess appearing on your podcast is obviously an honor and a nice little full circle moment as well. So I'm excited to see what we're going to talk about, man.
Yeah, I mean, it was, I think that the podcasting, I mean, I have to say that in the beginning, the podcasting thing, I didn't really understand it years ago. And it was actually the Marduk guys years and years and years ago who said to me, oh, you should listen to this guy, Joe Rogan. I was never into MMA. I didn't care about that stuff. And I didn't really care about podcasting either. And it sort of took a while. And then my cousin said it to me, um, however many years ago, you should start a podcast. And that was like 7 or 8 years ago. And I did actually do a test one. I recorded it. And I just never
Right.
quite understood what to do with it. I think I was too reliant on other people to fix the technology and the platforms, just being a Luddite. And then basically when lockdown started, it was sink or swim. It was either you need to do something or you're going to turn into, you're going to kill somebody or you're going to end up in on the news or something. And
Yeah.
it was a way to, you know, put that energy. And here we are years later, and it has its kind of own ecosystem. I see you and Jack here, sort of, you're cross pollinating your ecosystems. You're like, Madagascar to the mainland or whatever is going on.
Yeah, no, we've definitely shared quite a lot. We actually just did one recently where I did the news rant on his channel. It was quite fun. We were just reacting to shit, which was actually quite refreshing for me
Yeah,
with the amount of shit that's kind of fucking going on at the moment. It was nice just to react to like shitty film trailers like Neil Breen and
yeah, yeah.
fucking who killed Captain Alex. So it was fun, but yeah, it's very cool. I think that one of the main reasons for me that made me want to even get into the whole thing. I always felt like I kind of had a lot to share, and
Mm,
th it, there are certain things that you cannot express in words. That's why we become musicians to begin
mm.
with. That's why you write certain lyrics or certain melodies. There's like certain moods in music that you just cannot put into words. But then also on the other side of that, as a musician and an artist, you feel like you've got certain things to say that you can't necessarily put into
Yeah,
lyrics. Like you can't directly write lyrics about how you feel about the original Necrovore release. I mean, you can,
yeah.
but I don't think it would translate as well.
Well,
So,
I used to write reviews for magazines, and I also did a column in the back of Zero Tolerance, years and years ago, which I thought maybe would seek its way into doing a podcast. And thankfully, nobody's put those columns online as of yet. you know, I think
there we go.
15 years later, you might be in a bit more trouble for them. But yeah, I've always had other things to try and say. But it's a kind of ecosphere, whatever you want to call it, that at least when you speak to labels or something, or the metal scene hasn't fully got to grips with yet, which is the relative reach of the sort of of an audience who wants to hear about, as you say. I've thought about the reacting to something thing, but I'm sort of wary about becoming a YouTuber, of wary about becoming a presenter. It's not
Hmm.
really what I want to do. And also, just at the age you are, and also it can demystify. Well, I mean, everything that sounds like a kind of ridiculous comment to make right now, but it can sort of demystify the experience of people who, well, like Primordial, and they go, oh, they think they understand you a certain way because of the music. And then here you go, here's 150 episodes or something. And they go, I'm not sure I really agree with that guy about much. And it affects the way they listen to your music because Primordial, of course, is five people with five different opinions about things. So I tried to make the distinction between it being the Primordial podcast, which it wasn't. But you do run a risk of being too just becoming too familiar for people. So I didn't really want to be a YouTuber, even though I'd like the idea of doing a show where you comment on news and something like that. But then you're sort of beholden to whatever that is.
Mhm. I 100% know what you mean. Every concern that you just listed there is stuff that has gone through my head. And by the way, it still does.
Yeah, yeah,
I have, especially more so recently, just decided to go down the route of just doing whatever the fuck, like we just
yeah,
actually started a new fitness series, which I'll be
yeah.
releasing, so it's like a podcast, but we're training at the same time. Perhaps you and I should do one together someday. But
I'll do free kicks in football. Yeah,
yeah, that's it. No, listen, man, I'm up for it. So this is the thing. I want to try different stuff as well. So it's not just going in there to do, like gym bro stuff.
yeah,
I'm open to doing martial arts episodes, even maybe yoga episodes, and all different kinds of stuff. I'm
yeah,
open-minded. But the thing that you're saying, it's 100% true. And you do run the risk of demystifying, but also at the same time, the point which I've kind of arrived at, I'm kind of generally as a person, as a human being, I am someone who wears their heart on their sleeve anyway, and I do talk to the other guys in Trivax, but since I kind of just to kind of make sure that I got the right levels, because
mm,
I don't want to shine the wrong light on them, So if I say
sure.
something stupid, I want to be the one that takes responsibility for it. But I think that even though I don't, like I've been doing this for like 3.5 years now, I'm yet to fucking get in trouble for anything. If anything, the podcast has actually allowed and opened up
Yeah,
opportunities of connecting with that following and fan base in ways that were simply not possible before.
yeah,
And I get people like, I was just sat in a bar in Oslo, for example. This is just an example off the top of my head. There's been many of these, but some guy from LA just comes up to me and then says, "Oh man, I've been listening to the podcast and I lost like 40 pounds
yeah,
because of
yeah,
listening to you talk about your own personal shit."
yeah,
And then that made me want to get inspired. So to me, even if it kind of is less cult, I don't care, like I
yeah.
don't have to hide behind a thing to be edgy enough. I really don't give a shit. I
Mm.
feel strongly enough about my own background and who I am, where to me, that connection that comes with the audience and the following is 100% worth any other rest of the
Yeah.
bullshit.
I mean, for people who don't know, I mean, you're Iranian, and it's one of the reasons, obviously, we're talking is because of the fucking, or about to talk is because of the stuff that's happening in the world. Um, but you can see obviously behind you true Iranian black metal, but maybe you can outline to begin that the journey from being there to here speaking like this, because I do have some. I used to speak back in the day to a whole bunch of Iranians online in a kind of secret forum, and also to a
Okay,
whole bunch of other Middle Eastern fans, maybe 2006, 7, 8 kind of era. And I
very cool.
gave someone a USB clip full of music, which got into the country, I think got through the scene years and years ago. And we used to talk about a lot of stuff. I got a lot of information. I wrote even articles about, um, you know, the repression of women in the Middle East and in Iran and in the metal scene, even 15, 16, 17 years ago, 15,
Mhm,
16 years ago. And I did an article about the Iranian sort of the attempted uprising that happened, maybe 2 years ago, year and a half ago.
mhm.
I wrote a
Yeah,
podcast about that about 100 episodes ago. So it's always been,
I remember.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's always been something I've been very interested in and interested in the history any day, every day, which is the Mossadegh and the CIA and the Ayatollah. So I've always been kind of very on top of being interested in it. But today I was talking to a bunch of friends. I was like, okay, I'm going to rather than me debate on WhatsApp with a bunch of you guys, you know, going to reach out to somebody who is Iranian and let's have a conversation about the fucking crazy situation that we're in. But anyway, start with
Yeah.
your journey from. Be succinct now. Let's go from how the fuck did you end up here? But escaping Iran or whatever the fuck.
Sure, man. Well, I guess it's one of those things, like when you're born in a place, when you grow up, especially during childhood, and this is not something that's geographically exclusive, but let's say if you grow up in an abusive environment as a kid or as a child, you just think that's the normal,
Yeah,
right? And this is something that happens all around the world to
Yeah, yeah,
everyone. Unfortunately, it's just a part of life. And then it's only when you get older that you realize, hang on, that was kind of bullshit,
yeah, yeah.
and then you start to rebel, or you start to follow the same footsteps. Okay. For me, I luckily came from a fairly functional family that helped a lot.
Yeah.
I had fairly positive, um, I would say, traits kind of hammered into me from a young age,
Mm,
like treating people with respect, and not making a fool out of yourself, and even the concept of karma and things like that. I was very lucky, because my mother, she was also someone who was very much into arts and music. She actually did her own poetry in the 80s, and she did that in English,
it
okay,
seems
which
like
is
a very it seems like a very big thing in Persian culture, poetry.
yeah. Oh, it 100% is. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Like people use poetry even in like debates and stuff.
Mm, yeah,
It's
I
very,
noticed this when I was looking into this stuff. Yeah,
yeah, yeah. It's a very deeply ingrained part of our culture is poetry. My mother, she, as I mentioned, used to write her own songs, not songs, but poems in English in the 80s, which you have to understand. That's a big deal for someone to do that. And she didn't do it to be rebellious, but I think she perhaps had an urge or an artistic instinct that
sure.
she just had to follow. And she actually has a DIY book of her own that
Wow.
she published to friends and family. I've got it on my bedside table here because it's a source of positive mental attitude and thinking, and just how to be a good, decent person. So luckily I had that, okay, and my father, he's someone very hardworking, and quite a courageous person, and he did quite well for himself. He came from nothing basically, and then he basically became an engineer in Tehran, and then basically built a life for himself, and then
Sure.
when him and my mother got together, they obviously had me. Now,
And
so
this is post. I mean, we're talking obviously post 79. So the Ayatollah
it
coming
is.
back, and yeah,
Yeah, yeah. So Khomeini is already completely fucked up Iran, and we're under the Islamic Republic,
yeah, yeah.
So that this was the thing that I'm trying to draw a clear distinction between is that my family life and my childhood within that was absolutely fine. It
Mm.
was the outside world,
Yeah, yeah,
like being completely traumatized as a 5-year-old watching cartoons, literally cartoons that were about a tank that would go into a cinema and blow everyone up. And then a 13-year-old child would strap grenades to himself and jump under the tank to blow up the tank, and
yeah, yeah.
then me just being scared shitless as a kid. But then also learning at a young age to kind of level with the monsters with my own imagination. Like I always used to draw pictures of like monsters and demons even when I was like 6,
Yeah.
and part of it was because I actually saw some stuff like that.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
maybe that's a little bit of a caveat we can explore later if you wish. But yeah. So yeah, or like even seeing like videos of like like Shiite fucking propaganda on TV, and that kind of stuff does really heavily affect you, and that darkness very easily sits in your psyche. And then as you grow older, from age 7, boys and girls are separated in school
Yeah.
because it's not appropriate or whatever, which already I think is fucking stupid, And then girls from age 9, they have to wear hijab because, according to them, like the moment you have your first period, then I don't have
Yeah.
to get into it. It's all stuff that heavily enrages me, and knowing the history, knowing the great and grand history of Persia and Iran, it boils my blood that
Yeah.
our culture and government got infected with the cancer of Islam and the Islamic Republic, and to the extent that which it did, but yeah, I think for me, just kind of fast forward, like I always was very much a westernized child in the sense of just my own interest. Like no one forced me to be that way. I was always somehow that way by default. I've said the story before where I was like, I think 7 or 8 years old going into school one day, and they had a propaganda day,
Mm.
and they had the US flag with a couple of American soldiers like really badly drawn next to it. and all of the kids upon entrance to the school were mandated to step on the flag as a sign of disrespect to the US. And
Sure.
as far as I recall, I was the only kid that actually skipped over the flag because I thought America is cool. I don't want to disrespect those guys. They have like all the cool stuff. And
Mhm.
I remember as I jumped over it, this older kid, was like maybe 3, 4 years older than me, stood there guarding everything, started shouting at me saying, "Hey, you need to go back and rub your shoe on it. They're infidels, whatever." So I just really like sheepishly just like touched the corner of my shoe on the flag and then just like ran off. It ran off.
Yeah.
And
Good. Yeah.
yeah, and yeah, man, that was kind of how I was. And then I discovered uh music. And when I discovered music, then I just kind of started to find more power within that. And by this time, by the way, FYI, I was actually a practicing Muslim. So I think I was
Sure.
13, 14 years old. I was a practicing Muslim at that time. And I was actually kind of on the way of being somewhat fanatical about it too. Like I was the one going around telling my friends, hey, we should all go pray together.
Mm.
And then I found out about Metallica. 6 months later, I'm listening to The Mysteries. And then literally within a year of that, me, the same kid, by the time I was 15, I'm literally burning Qurans in Central Parks in Tehran, which God knows how fucking lucky I got to get away without getting killed. But I've got the videos. Maybe I'll post them someday. I don't know if that's enough of a summary of my background in Iran.
Oh, and then, well, I know it's interesting because there's so many misunderstandings and sort of even today, you will see the sort of my enemy's enemy is my friend sort of ideology. I mean, if you even look at the Ayatollah, I mean, he spent 14 years in exile in France, and he was
He
fated
did.
by that sort of post 69 left, or the sort of, well, or I suppose earlier than that, but the sort of Marxist left in Europe. And there's always been this very strange sort of marriage between an uncomfortable marriage between, I guess, anti-imperialists amongst the left in Europe and Islam as they saw as its natural enemy. But then, of course, the Ayatollah comes in and just murders all those people, and
Mhm.
none of them ever seem to really, at least as I can, when I discuss this with them, learn quite the lesson that these two ideologies I don't think fit together. And then anyway, I was going to keep going, but that seems like enough of a segue, you know.
No, no, well, that is certainly the case. I've been screaming off the rooftops about that ever since I moved to the UK, which is now 13 years ago. I'm a very
Yeah.
proud British citizen now, of course, and that's not sarcastic, by the way. I am
Oh
actually
no.
very proud to be
Yeah.
British, and I take that quite seriously. I see it as a responsibility, as a matter of fact, and this is why I like talking about these things because I don't want to see the same thing that happened to Iran happen over here either,
Yeah.
which you could say in some places is maybe on its way to,
Yeah.
but we can get into that if you want.
Yeah.
But I think part of the kind of the shielding that a lot of people, including a lot of my friends on the left, give Islam and this ideology is quite baffling to me.
Yeah.
I think that, like you said, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Because at the time when Khomeini took over, it was really the alliance between the Islamists and the communists that
Yeah.
caused for the regime at the time to collapse and for the Shah to go into exile, which is something that I think people should be, I suppose, a bit more concerned about in the West, if it's not too late, both in Europe and in America. I think that's something that's definitely worth paying attention to. But ultimately, at the end of it, the two are absolutely incompatible. I mean, if you want to talk about actual Islamic law,
Yeah.
like, for example, the idea of being non-binary is extremely blasphemous because only Allah is allowed to be non-binary. Okay,
Yeah.
so by saying that you're non-binary, you're basically putting yourself at the same level as Allah, which is like you may as well get killed for that. Okay.
Yeah.
So there are little interesting nuances there, which never really made sense to me, and people always whinge about how, oh, we should read more about history to uh, learn not to repeat our mistakes, but they don't seem to be following through with that at all, or if they're reading history, they seem to only want to look at it and hear only what they want to hear, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
I mean, it's the same. I think it's the same thing. I think that's, it's something I've been singing about for such a long time or talking about for a long time is that the sort of innate spiritual inertia, and as a not as a religious person, but of the innate structural collapse of relative Western morals, or the idea that I would say it's a kind of internal sickness where Western society has no understanding of any of the, it doesn't see anything of worth in its,
Mhm.
and it's been inculcated within society for decades. And whether, as we say, whether that is the, civilization restructures such as, well, freedom of speech or democracy or all those kind of things, they're now seen as gaslighting words. Or free speech is
Mhm.
only, a concern of the right or something like this. And I've had conversations with people, and I don't think they really, they just see, the sort of Middle Eastern discussion as a, oppressor and oppressed, colonialized. I mean, I understand why Irish people can, gravitate towards that and be pro-Palestinian. I mean, that's absolutely fair enough in those terms, but it's so much more complicated than that,
Mhm.
historically. And again, it's never ceases to amaze me how it shouldn't be lost on people that to live in a Western society that allows you to protest on the streets for its own downfall is part of the privilege of being in the West. Try doing that in a country which obviously doesn't uphold those values, and then you'll see the worth of them. So it's almost like just being a sort of a spoilt, indulged society that, at least for quite a few generations, hasn't had anything to struggle or fight for. I mean, that's quite a long rambling,
No, but I'm with you,
but
man. I'm with
that's
you.
kind of how I understand it, and I view it. But like I said, the idea that you know people want to sort of either a communist state or an Islamic state in Europe, and they think that will be somehow revere the protected minority rights and statuses of people that they, you know,
Mm.
it's just not. I mean, come on. It seems a
Yeah,
complete
no,
complete misreading of history.
it for sure is. And I always think to myself, I don't want to come across as someone who's shaming other people, for believing a certain way that they do. But I remember we were actually at Beyond the Gates
Mm.
last year, and we were in Bergen. I know you were supposed to be there, and
Yeah, yeah.
I think some last minute stuff happened. But nevertheless, I remember going to a coffee place with my friend Katie and our very good friend Christian from the band Necrofire,
Mm.
and he also
Oh yeah,
organizes Hell's Heroes in the
yeah, yeah. I
US.
know
Great
him. Yeah,
guy.
yeah, yeah. Great guy.
Yeah, yeah, great guy. And Katie's also a great friend of ours. And we were there. And I remember this, as a fitness coach, I should really be careful about the following words that I'm about to utter in how I describe this person. But let's say there was this lady. I don't know if she identified as a lady or not, but she appeared to have been a lady. Maybe I'm being presumptuous, but that was the case. And she was on a, should we say, more larger measurements,
Yeah.
and she had a communist shirt on. And I was fucking fuming at that because I was like, if you're actually in a communist country, you wouldn't even be allowed to be overweight, you know? And this idea that, oh yeah, this is oh, it's never been done right. It just like baffles me. It's like how many tries do you need? How many millions of people need to die of starvation before you finally figure it out? And I think that it's an idea and an ideology that on paper sounds fucking amazing. But that sense of that enforced level of equality is not something that's compatible with nature itself. Not just the nature of humans, but the nature of the world and the matrix that we live in, because it's very much, if you think about it, you can talk about how we live inside a Saturnalian version of the matrix and how there is an element of exchange within everything. So everything that you want, you have to pay for it somehow, whether it's with your time or whether it's with money or whether it's with your attention. Everything has almost a sense of trade to it, even the smallest of things that are out there. Okay, and enforcing this type of political ideology, especially at mass scale, when you know how high and how deep the levels of corruption can go is just simply not something
Yeah.
that will ever work.
No, I
Okay.
mean, like if you read the Communist Manifesto or something, which is like 1848, I think. I mean, and then you consider the rebellions or the uprisings that happened in Europe right after it, 1848, 1849, 1850. They make sense in the sense of a post monarchical society, European society, which is coming out of
Mm,
this concept of the divine right of inheritance, whatever you want to say, where Marx wanted people to take over the means of operation themselves, as a
mm,
and I mean on that value, I get that. It's just in 2025, or or how it disseminated itself through, let's call it this sort of middle class luxury belief system of the
mm,
West. Then I just don't see a connection between those two things. And of course, then you talk about things like the talk about how many people Mao killed or whatever, and the collateral damage that runs into tens of millions. Again, I think it's sort of like a middle class luxury belief system, which is a sort of Western indulgence that sort of almost it's like a masochism.
mhm.
You speak to people in the West. Like I had an argument last week with my friends. Who said, "Well, what's so good about this anyway?" And you're sort of, "Well, you live in a system that supports your idea to have no faith in it in that sense." And you realize that an awful lot of people just never really understood the nature of authoritarianism, or never really traveled to any of those countries, or never really. They seem so abstracted, even from the Second World War, or from, I suppose we could say, the Balkans in the 1990s, or like this thing they say, the West never remembers, the East never forgets. Like try and pull the same tricks
Mm.
in Poland or Ukraine or Hungary or Bulgaria or something, and they're going to give you short shrift. Try and go to Romania and tell them how great communism is, and you're not going to get a very positive answer. But it's I think one of the reasons is because communism provides an idealistic answer to a very complicated sort of medieval market system. Whereas an economic answer is very much more complicated than most of us can understand. So it appeals to our innate idealistic sense of fairness on some level, which I think most people, when you're young, they say, show me a young man who isn't a socialist, and I'll show you one who has no heart, and show me
Hmm.
an old man who's not a conservative, and I'll show you a man who has no brain.
Hmm.
And I sort of kind of subscribe to that on some level. And that's like getting older, you can see how if you have, children, you of course become innately conservative because you have something in this world to conserve. And I can understand why you believe the things you do when you're 18. It's just that the process of modern, sorry, I'm rambling now, but the process of modern technology has placed so much power in the hands of young people, because I think we're living in a society where young people are being encouraged to make adult decisions, and adults are being encouraged to behave like children. And we have child millionaires because they figured out the technology quicker. What the fuck am I talking about? Yeah, just I shouldn't have had those two beers in the Iron Maiden pop-up shop.
Those progressive beers, man.
Yeah, that's what they're called. I don't know, but you see what I mean? It's like the
Yeah.
West's systemic spiritual inertia or sickness, almost encourages it to embrace its own destruction. And I don't think the people who live within it really understand the forces that could take over what they have if they bring about the destruction that they think they want. Does that make any
Well,
sense?
that it absolutely does. This is one of the main reasons why I'm a militant anti-censorship
Hmm.
but believer, if you will, because I know what that looks like on the other side. I know how exchange of information and especially, or more so, silencing of
Hmm.
information can be weaponized at a mass scale because, that's what we experienced in Iran.
Yeah.
We were limited to 5 TV channels, and out of those, propaganda was on every 5. Channel 3 was always kind of like the more lighthearted one, where you would have like some sitcoms and drama series, or football. That's the main one. You would watch football.
Yeah.
Football's fucking huge in Iran.
Sure.
And and the thing with that you gotta understand is is the fact that you put it perfectly when you said that, one of the luxuries of being over here is the simple fact that the system allows you the opportunity to not believe in it.
Yeah.
Okay. Try being somewhere in Iran where criticizing the supreme leader, criticizing the prophet that the country is following can basically get you killed,
I mean, that
you
was
know?
what happened, what, a year and a half ago, 2 years ago. It was the girl, I can't remember her name. My,
Masa Amini.
that's it, yeah. And she got basically, just killed by the religious police in the street.
Yes. Although, goddamn, we all best get our fucking tinfoil hats on here. That is what happened, and on the surface, okay, and there are many, many, many other cases like her that were actually never
Yeah.
publicized the way
Yeah. Yeah.
that they were. I've seen that happen with my own
Oh, yeah.
eyes, and I remember being a child and then being at the back of like a school service car, it's like a service taxi that drops off kids at like different spots. And I remember we drove past this lady who had taken off her headscarf, and all of us were saying, "Oh my God, she's crazy. She's gonna get beaten up." But then it's such a thing that's so heavily Orwellian and deeply ingrained in us that it was almost like we were like, well, you're doing that to yourself kind of thing. Do you
Yeah.
understand what I mean? So that's
Yeah.
the society that we live in, and I think anywhere that women are enforced to even live with those conditions is that's a real fucking failure of human decency at its basic levels. But the the thing that people want to realize. By the way, I don't know if you want to move on to the other one because I know we got a few minutes and
Yeah.
we're tapping into lengthy topics.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we can do another 3 minutes, and I mean, but yeah, and then we can just clip on to the next one. But yeah, I mean, no, no, yeah, you were talking. I interrupted.
Yeah, 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 no, all good, man. I just wanted to give a courteous heads up.
I mean,
But
like, it's when the group of people that I used to speak to, one of them was a girl from Iran, and she
mhm,
was she was saying that in northern Iran, a friend of hers had been stoned, and there was a video circulating in the group of someone had secretly filmed the stoning, and
mhm,
she sort of said to me, please use this in any arguments you have with Western feminists to try and stand up for Islam or something, or
yeah.
try and sort of deflect from the brutal truth of what is actually happening.
Yeah,
Um,
you talk about beheading. There's beheading. There's acid throwing.
oh,
I don't know how familiar you are with
yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah,
That's a big thing as well, unfortunately. And a lot of that stems from the simple fact of, I guess, because if you've got a woman next to you, okay, in normal circumstances, usually women are very good at keeping men on their toes. And if you're doing something or if you're a part of something that's bullshit, usually the woman will tell you, say, You did what? Oh, you could have done better than that. How much did you spend on this? You could have done better." And that's actually, some people struggle with that, but when you sort of have that perfected and you have that harmonious situation, women's role in society is very important in those contexts because they get to go behind men and push them to be their best. Okay. Hopefully, if it's a good woman, you got plenty of shit situations as well. I know that. But I'm just speaking of the ideal here.
mm,
Now, when you have a society like Iran where you completely shut down and switch off the role of women, you're also already basically fending off any sort of future uprising because you're not going to have the woman next to you saying that, hey, that this government, they're really like imposing shit things on us. But
yeah,
then the guy says, nah, shut up, you're the woman. What
yeah,
you're saying doesn't matter. And
yeah,
this is common all over the country in our culture. Well, I say culture, it wasn't prior to the Islamic
yeah, yeah.
Revolution, but now it is because there's essentially legal incentive for it to be
Yeah.
that way,
Well, I
you know?
suppose it's the very basic essence of what is actually a patriarchal society.
Mm.
That's what
Yeah,
that is.
absolutely.
And if it benefits the men who take advantage of it, then some of them, why would they want to dismantle, especially if it's ingrained in them, in a theocratic sense.
Yeah, absolutely, man. And such is the curse, we can talk more about the Massa situation specifically if you want, because there are
Well, let
some.
me let me let me stop this one, and Um, but well, I think this sort of interestingly enough sets. Okay, well, let's talk about this. The uprising from where we're a year and a half, 2 years ago, which really seemed to be an uprising of women against the regime. Like watching the footage, and I was trying to go onto the sort of, the sort of websites where you could watch people filming it sort of in real time as to what was happening, but it was sort of brutally put down by the regime.
Well, it was. Yeah. And one thing to clarify, kind of like as I was
Yeah, yeah, that's
alluding to earlier,
yeah,
there have been many of these throughout the years, so it
yeah,
starts
yeah,
from the I know you posted about this yourself, but
yeah, yeah,
right before the Iran-Iraq war happened, a lot of women were actually already doing an uprising in, I believe, 1980 or thereabouts, like right after the Islamic Revolution
yeah, yeah,
took over the country. And then you had mandatory hijab laws. And then the war happened, which absolutely worked in the favor of Khomeini. And
yeah,
obviously, because, you've got this outside boogeyman, um, which then kind of takes away the focus from poor leadership, but also it perpetuates the the reign of those in power. You can certainly look at various leaders across the world
yeah,
doing
yeah,
that thing right now as
yeah.
we
Of
speak.
course,
Okay,
yeah, yeah.
there are many examples, and
I
there have
mean,
been many examples in
Iran
history.
is such a resource rich country, and it's so
Is
huge. Most people don't realize, like, it's huge. There's a massive population. There's so many young people. I mean, and then you look at the wages of people, or you look at where the regime has just basically, pilfered and wasted all this money. I was trying to make this sort of a conflict in my head about what's, let's get to what's happening with the bombings and stuff, which is that if somehow there could be a sort of bloodless bombing, the removal of these, these uranium, whatever, enrichment facilities, as argued as they are about what they are, if somehow the people could then just kind of decapitate the regime. I mean, but I was trying to square that in my head as just one part of me is like, that's, out of an awful situation, that could be the best thing that could happen, that the people could take over
Mhm.
the country. But of course, then you look at, and there's so many other conflicting things going on in my head about, like, is this just a privileged Western position to consider that in a country that, the West shouldn't be deciding the outcome of these things. The regime change, that project for the new American century and all that stuff in the 1990s, which outlined
7 countries, and yeah,
seven
I'm aware.
countries, and Iran is the seventh, yeah, of regime change. And it's well, I'm waffling, but you tell me now as Iranian, like, what are you observing? What are you feeling? What are you hearing from people there about what's going on?
Alan, I'll be totally candid with you, man.
Yeah, please
Okay.
do. Yeah,
The sort of internal conflict that you just described there, I would say I've been experiencing that tenfolds
yeah, yeah,
for the last couple of weeks because it's something that I've always wanted. I have said on multiple podcasts, interviews everywhere that Iran's problem has to be solved from within.
yeah.
Okay. And of course, the Islamic Republic have such a stronghold on the country that this has been near impossible.
Mm,
Even when the Masa Amini stuff happened,
yeah,
this
yeah,
was September 2022, by the way, when that
yeah, yeah, yeah,
took
yeah.
place. So when all of that stuff kicked off, as much as I was behind the movement, the origin of it was actually quite suspicious to me. It almost had a signature style PR to it that kind of reminded me of certain other things that have happened in recent history.
Mm.
George Floyd protest being an example of it, it had the same PR signature, like seeing people like Billie Eilish go on stage with an Iranian flag. It's like, what the fuck do you know about Iran? Who's coming and whispering in your ear to do this,
But isn't that something, maybe just to sidetrack for a moment? Isn't that just something symptomatic of the nature of the sort of narcissistic luxury belief, sort of optical impulses that obsess Western
Mhm.
society? Like, I was thinking about this. Sorry for just for a moment. I mean,
Sure.
in the 1990s, in 2003, the invasion of Iraq, millions of people came out on the streets of London. I think 500,000 came out on the streets of Dublin, but it was against the government's wish, to invade Iraq, right? But there was no flags, there was no pageantry, there was no demonstrative optics because we didn't have fucking smartphones. So I just think, like, so much of what happens now, it fits exactly into our skeptical observations of that, because that, even for people who don't really understand that they're taking part in some sort of like I don't want to use the word psyop, but their their own modern impulse is being used for the very nature of that, because everything is just so demonstratively theatrical. Does that make any sense? Sorry,
It
that's a very
does make
complicated,
sense.
complicated way of explaining it, but
No, no. So the way you're looking at it is also correct, and that is actually true. It's definitely a part of things. The way which the angle that I'm kind of looking at it,
mm,
this is like the Aleister Crowley thing, like you could be looking at the same thing but from different angles.
sure.
Um, that the way that I look at it is that these things are not coincidental,
Mm,
okay? And even something as perhaps sort of seemingly shallow as top people in the music industry uniting over a cause can very much be something that is used maybe even in just simple backdoor political negotiations.
yeah. Oh
Okay.
no, I think you could see that. Yeah, especially during
Yeah.
COVID, you saw the co-opting of influencers to spread the message the government wanted. But
Yeah, yeah. So I think this actually very much you already know my views on that. So
yeah,
this very much I think kind of plays into that. So I'm always very skeptical
sure.
of these things, and I'm saying all of this having resented the Islamic Republic for pretty much the majority of my life.
Yeah,
There's nothing, Alan, I'll straight up, there's nothing I would love to see more than seeing Iran change for the better and buying a flight back home. I would literally like quit my job. I would stop and drop everything I'm
wait,
doing.
wait, 1 second. Am I okay? Fucking blind. So sorry, go on. I'll edit that bit. I just for a moment I was like, oh fuck, I'm not recording. Yeah, no, go on. I don't want you
Yeah,
to.
there's nothing I would there is literally nothing on this life that I would love to see more
Yeah,
than Iran changing for the better. And then I would literally drop everything I'm doing. I
and go
would
back home.
probably even cancel gigs. I
Yeah,
would
yeah.
quit my job and I would go back home just to spend a few months there. I wouldn't probably
Well,
move there because I've built a good
sure.
life here for myself. And
Well, I'm sure
yeah.
there's people who are listening down there. They just want me to ask you, like, well, what are you hearing from people in around? Like, what is because obviously so much of what I see and what we see, we're not sure what the fuck is happening. Like, what is happening from the people that you're talking to in Tehran or in Iran right now? But I know people probably screaming at me, get on, get on, get on. We want to know this stuff.
hmm Sure. Maybe screaming at me too, rightfully so. So I think that so there's conflicting opinions, as you can already imagine.
Yeah,
There are those who are saying that we don't like the Islamic Republic, but
yeah,
this is our country and enemy is enemy and yada yada yada.
yeah, yeah.
Same thing
Of
that
course.
kind of happened early on with Iraq, but then people were a lot more easily radicalized back then.
Yeah,
And now, like as soon as you've got a boogeyman outside, you got to deal with that before you deal with the one inside. But Iran's case in this is very complicated, okay?
yeah, yeah.
And then there are also many people in Iran, friends and family who I know, who are saying that, oh, great, let's use this opportunity to topple the regime.
Yeah,
Let's
yeah.
get rid of these fucking disgusting
I mean,
mullahs,
that's the best case scenario that there's a sort of bloodless decapitation of the sort of head of the snake or something like that. But that seems to me to be a very optimistic way of looking at considering what happened to like Iraq and Libya and the other countries that sort of
Well, this is the thing. This is the thing. Iraq and Libya, like I am fully aware of that. And, trust me, like I have had many conversations about this with friends over the years, which is why I say I'm so conflicted, like as
mm,
far as mullahs are concerned, like I will not rest easy until there is a day where not a single turban remains in the authoritative power of Iran.
mm,
Okay? That you can absolutely bet on. The thing that worries me is the fact that these cunts, these mullahs, the Islamic Republic, they are in charge of everything. They're in charge of all the resources.
yeah, yeah,
They're in charge of all the fucking weapons down there. And I get that, yes, the infrastructure is slowly breaking down, but you have to understand this is the thing that I said in a video that I put out there, and And people perhaps misunderstood the point that I was trying to make, but the way to look at the Islamic Republic is that imagine a suicide bomber,
Mm.
but now imagine that that suicide bomber is an actual entire government, okay?
Yeah,
That's got tons of money and it's got tons of weapons,
yeah, yeah,
okay? And I don't, if they truly believe in the dogma that they do believe in,
yeah.
I don't think they're necessarily even afraid of death. I
This
don't think they're
is
necessarily
yeah.
afraid of their own destruction
This is
should it serve their divine purpose, you
I.
know?
This is what I've been thinking about all afternoon. I did another podcast about this very thing, and what that's exactly what I was thinking about. Is that for people to, I think the secular West doesn't really understand or doesn't want to understand when they meet somebody religious who tells them this is what I believe because we've so spectacularly left that behind. But when you meet somebody who goes, well, when this is a death cult and this is what we believe, we go, come on now, really, come on now, really. We think,
Yeah,
how can
yeah,
you
it's true.
how can you reason with people who believe in biblical prophecy? You can't, they're not going to listen to rational, reasonable, skeptical, atheist argument about, the validity of their debate. But this is what we're arguing about it today, me and my friends. And I said, the concept of mutually assured destruction that is part of the nuclear sort of deal, which is that when you strike first, the strike coming back is going to destroy everything you are. When you place that capability in the hands of a religious theocracy who embraces death, it changes the concept of mutually assured destruction because even India and Pakistan have it. I think they don't want to see each other wiped off the map. They just fucking hate each other. Whereas this is where you get a bit squirrely because you talk about the plutonium or uranium enrichment facilities and stuff. If the ultimate objective of Iran is to achieve the ability to have nuclear weapons, the percentage, the idea that they are going to use them, I think, is highly, highly, is far greater considering, as you say, the religious um, intent that is behind that, and that should worry the whole rest of the world. Then, of course, as you say, you've got the national sovereignty question. But that was sort of trying to get to the thing that was going through my head today earlier, which was,
Mm.
I mean, these are people that the world doesn't want to have a nuclear weapon, even though that sits really difficult in a very difficult way with liberals who don't believe there should be any. They see this as an imperialist intervention,
Mm.
to begin with. Well, anyway,
Yeah.
sorry, long
It's
rambling,
it's
blah
not
blah
just
blah.
the no, no, I'm with you on that. It's not just the liberals, but a lot of the people on the right, especially a lot of people on the far right, are completely on the side of Iran. Part of it, like I can see how they got to that point. Okay, I do understand that, because I have friends from all sides, and I like to sit back and kind of
You mean they're
observe
on the
to see
side of
what
Iran
everyone's
because
thinking.
they're on the side of Iran because it's against Israel, or
Partially that, yeah.
mm,
Yeah, it is, I actually, if you really think about it, especially in a political context, just as a little bracket here,
yeah,
the further left and the further right that you go,
yeah,
they are completely aligned on the issue of
yeah. It's
Iran
like a
and Israel.
horseshoe. It's like a horseshoe.
It is,
Yeah,
yes, at this
sometimes. Yeah,
particular time,
yeah,
and this is something that maybe people are starting to realize slowly. And
yeah.
I'm not saying that they are. I don't want to like shame people for like believing a certain way. I have to be clear about that because I do consider myself a free speech absolutist.
Same, more or less. Yeah,
And and I mean that in the literal sense,
yeah,
okay? Because I know what the absence of it looks like, and
yeah.
I don't want to live in that kind of world.
No, I mean it's
But
not, and it's not. Free speech absolutism comes with its own many problems and issues, as everything does.
sure.
It's just that any percentage wise of an alternative places the decisions in the hands of, authoritarianism to decide those kind of things. So it's not a foolproof, let's say,
Oh no. Oh no,
belief.
it
You know,
certainly does, but that's also the absolute nature of capitalism to begin with. It's a system that works, but it absolutely has its faults and it's open to corruption, and
yeah.
especially the more humans become comfortable and the less sort of regulations that they have,
Mm,
the you basically enter a world where like OnlyFans is making like fucking billions of
Of
dollars,
course.
and then
Well,
that's the kind of world that we live in, which, by the way, I don't care for that either. I
no,
don't
no. Well,
care for
that's the unfortunate thing is I mean, I don't want that Western world either. But let me ask you this: one thing that struck me when all of this started to kick off was how geopolitically alone Iran seemed, because the China meh, sort of said nothing, Russia said nothing, who were supposed allies of Iran, and also the proxy the proxy nature of Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, Yemen and stuff, they all seem to have been neutered by Mossad and stuff. But so it seems like there must have been a moment where the Iranian regime were kind of like, "Fuck, we seem to be on our own here," facing what's incoming now. As you say, there may be a religious dimension where I actually think maybe they want a sort of ground invasion to mobilize. They kind of want the Gazaization of areas of Iran to mobilize public opinion and that kind of stuff. I'm not sure their death cult is quite as profound as maybe Hamas, but then again, they were funding Hamas. But it's, you know what I mean? It's
yeah. Now imagine Iran as the drunk guy at 12 midnight on a Saturday, who's just waiting for someone to look at them funny just so they can fight, you know?
Sure. It's just that the guy they pick a fight with happens to have an older brother who's much bigger outside who can just come in. No,
Yeah,
I totally get
absolutely.
it.
Yeah.
I totally get it. What I'm trying to say is like, it just seemed like Iran was quite alone geopolitically there when this started, you know?
It is, but the thing that you also got to understand, I kind of want to take a couple of steps back there, because
Yeah.
there was something that I was thinking about, and it's the following, that with Iran, you have to understand when the Islamic Republic took over, I always look at that, much like Islam now get called cancer, people actually use the emoji and write it, I love that, by the way, because in a way, personally, I feel like it is. You know, when the Islamic Republic took over, you can look at it in a way that Iran, the country of Iran, the land of Iran, and what was previously known as Persia,
Mhm.
got cancer. Okay. And I feel like for the last few years, we've been going through a period of chemotherapy. Okay.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah.
Now, let's say if we do beat like either the cancer is going to take us out or we're going to beat it. But then nevertheless, the country is going to be very weak.
Yeah.
Okay. And that geopolitical silence that you mentioned, who's on the border to Iran on the eastern side, on the northeast, is Afghanistan.
Yeah. Yeah.
Taliban are currently fucking sat there waiting with all of the tons of US weapons that fucking genocidal maniac Biden administration fucking left them there.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you have to understand that could have serious repercussions, and no one can take on Afghanistan because they're all made of mountains, and
Yeah.
they got all the fucking opium of the world,
Yeah. So
basically.
we've got Syria and we've got Afghanistan and we've got, I mean, Iran is such a huge place that it would be very easily divided into tribal factionism. I mean, it's such a the different regions and the different areas. Yeah, you could see a sort of power vacuum into which like even more radical Islamic fundamentalism could ride into.
Absolutely, yes. So the fact of the matter is that as much as personally I want to see this nice and green rebuilding of the country, like back in the 70s,
Yeah.
Iran was in a top 5 tourist attractions in all of the
Yeah.
world,
Yeah.
alongside Casablanca and the like.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I would love to see a return of that, but at the end of the day, that if a regime change is to happen, then Iran will be dependent on a lot of other things. Now, I do believe that if the Iranian people are to come together, then perhaps they will be able to topple the regime. Okay. That part is not so much the question. I think it's how it is done,
Yeah.
and especially the more Western intervention it's done with, the more problematic it's going to be. Because you have to understand, even when Khomeini took power, that would have never happened without Western intervention,
Yeah. Yeah.
because it goes back to the time of Mossadegh.
Mossadegh.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
By the way, the Islamists in Iran, they're still running on the Mossadegh thing on all of the TVs. Khamenei himself is still talking about
Yeah.
Mossadegh.
Yeah. It's like what,
And
1915, 1953 or something, isn't it? Yeah.
I think it was 50, Yeah, I think it was in the 50s. Yeah, but now whether it was early 50s or
Yeah,
late
yeah. It's
50s.
early
Uh,
50s, I think. Yeah,
yeah, yeah. So obviously Mossadegh was someone who basically tried to take control of Iran's oil, for anyone who's
yeah,
unaware.
yeah, yeah, yeah. He
And
was a democratically elected guy, very interesting guy, and yeah, he tried to sort of, well, basically take back the Iran's resources for itself
yeah.
from
And he
BP.
very strangely looked like Nosferatu
Yeah,
if he
yeah,
was a normal person.
yeah,
If you see
yeah,
pictures of him.
yeah. But
But,
he tried to take back British petroleum, and he tried to take back the resources, and then the CIA kind of instigated a coup. I think it's their second coup they did, was it? I mean, the first one is somewhere in Central America, could be Guatemala or something. Anyway, look, it's yeah, we're getting
yeah,
sidetracked.
so they did, and then basically, Mossadegh, basically the British were rinsing the Iranians of the money, and then Mossadegh gets into power, finds
Yeah.
out about this, and then goes, well, fuck that, so basically
Mm.
cuts off the British access to Iranian oil, and then with the help of the Americans, the secret services
Yeah.
basically overthrow Mossadegh by sending people to the streets on his behalf to basically
Yeah.
cause chaos. And Mossadegh actually dies in house arrest, and then
Yeah.
this kind of planted the seed very much. Um, that very much affected the Islamic Revolution that came 20 odd
Yeah.
years later, that made people want to overthrow the Shah.
Exactly. Yeah.
By the, by the way, all of that started as again another type of internal coup. So there was a situation called there was a cinema called Cinema Rex. People
Mm.
can look this up for themselves. Very interesting thing. This has actually helped Khomeini get into power massively. There was about 600 people there in the cinema.
Oh
Okay,
yeah, I
so a
know the
lot of
story.
people.
Yeah, yeah, I know the
Yeah,
story. Yeah.
and then they were basically locked in there, and then the place was set on fire, and
Yeah, yeah,
obviously
yeah.
all of those people tragically died. It was a horrendous tragedy.
Yeah.
And then Khomeini and his clerics and his people were basically saying that the Shah did this.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. And then it came out years later after Khomeini took power that, oh no, his own people did it. And then they just put the blame on Shah. So
Yeah.
those are the kind of people that they were, that's why in the, with Trivax, the latest album, we called it The Great Satan,
Mm.
because that's what Khomeini always called the West. But we put his face on there with
Yeah, yeah.
the necklace of children's skulls because,
Yeah.
as far as I'm concerned, that's who he was. But anyway, I digress a little bit. The nature of the Islamic Republic is that, like when you mentioned the term sovereign nation
Mm.
earlier, okay, as
Yeah.
we were discussing the nuclear situation.
Yeah.
Iran is not a sovereign nation. Iran is a nation of people taken hostage by an extremist Islamist mafia
Yeah.
who've been in power for 46 years, who, by the way, not only are they dangerous, but they're also very fucking incompetent at running a country.
Mm.
Okay. And
I didn't realize how much they had to do with drug running and South American gangs and
yeah,
so much of this kind of stuff as well, side hustles,
side hustles. Yeah, you could say that for sure, and they've got their fingers in all the pies. Listen, all of the journalists who work for Iran International and people working in BBC, because Trivax, we actually did a short documentary with BBC,
Oh, really?
and I
Okay.
know.
Interesting.
Yeah, no, they actually made a documentary about us. It came out last year. People can go check it out. It's even
Oh,
on
okay.
Spotify and whatnot. But and obviously, like, listen, I'm aware that the BBC are a fountain of misinformation. We all saw that during COVID, but nevertheless, they made a very nice documentary about us, and that's
Yeah.
credit to Sahar, the presenter and journalist, and she's an amazing journalist, by the
Mm.
way. She's Iranian originally,
Okay. Yeah, yeah.
and she's got some amazing pieces on what she's done. But the thing is that, I know through her and various other sources that some of these journalists, even when they're in London, they are threatened. Okay, and you would
Oh,
think
yeah.
in London you're gonna be safe, but no, 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 no. There's
Oh,
like
no.
assassination attempts, London, US, wherever.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
because they have the resources. And in today's world, it's, all you need is Bitcoin to put a target on someone.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. I mean, it was, although I don't think, I mean, this is the thing that I've been sort of also researching today. I've been discussing and researching the enrichment and depleted uranium and all this kind of stuff. But
Mm.
I don't think and maybe even the Iranian regime. I mean, the Mossad has been busy picking off their scientists for the last 10 or 15 years as well, you know. And I mean that just sort of, you know, the pager, the phone pager thing, getting rid of Hezbollah leaders and kind of stuff. I mean, there must have been a moment where they were going, "Fucking hell, we're more infiltrated than we think," you know.
Well, yeah, and this is the thing. So what happened, like let's say in the more recent case, because I saw Ahmadinejad talking about this,
Mm.
and he's someone who I fucking hated growing up,
Yeah, yeah,
and I can't say I like him, but he said some interesting stuff over the years that kind of made me kind of do like a double take, you
yeah,
know, like, but nevertheless, I digress. He himself was saying that the person who was in charge of reporting on their Israeli intent was the person who got caught for basically giving away Iranian intel to the other side. But at the same time, you think it was just a one person? No, it would have been a whole group of people.
yeah,
You know,
yeah.
that's how they located all of the commanders and stuff. By the way, really fucking interesting thing I saw the other day. It's just a little tangent here before I continue. Fucking the Islamic medical head of the country, okay, because they got Islamic fucking medicine people as well. You know, I guess
Sure.
maybe it's somewhat similar to someone who's into Christian Science, but then this is actually someone who's quite high up in Iran, okay? One of the mullahs, you know, one of the fucking
Mm.
turban heads. He's come out and said that um the the reason why they were able to locate all of these Iranian generals and bosses so precisely is because of the COVID vaccines, that they were using that to track them,
Wow.
which is right. That's interesting. Now, obviously, there's no like backing to that, but for someone high up like that to come out and say some shit like that, I was fucking really fascinated by
I
that.
mean, I've
I
also
just
heard
wanted
that
to put that out there.
they've also said some crazy things about as well that I mean, I read something about how they were sending secret signals via football teams and how they were lining up. You know, they were using football teams in
Oh.
Western football teams covertly. Yeah, sorry, I shouldn't have. It's just a totally random thing that I
Yeah.
was reading.
No, it is.
People are,
It's
people are
it's
going to be like,
interesting
oh,
though.
oh, 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 don't hate.
Yeah. Yeah, get all your tinfoil hats on.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
But the fact of the matter is, you know, like I'm not disputing what the guy's saying. I'm not saying I believe in it. I'm just saying it's interesting that
yeah, yeah,
someone like him would come out and publicly say something like that. And he was saying that we begged you not to take it, but you did anyway. Anyway, I want to kind of digress quickly just to clarify one thing, because
yes,
I know this is probably going through people's heads,
yeah,
and maybe they've already made a comment about it in the comment section, which are always welcome to. But the thing that I want to also kind of outline here is one of the common things that's coming up right now in the argument between Iran and Israel. Okay,
mm,
just those two. Let's isolate them for a moment. Is that nuclear thing? Okay,
yeah,
so a lot of people are saying that well, Israel has they have nukes. Of
yeah,
course they do. They never signed a legal thing for it. All of
mm,
that. I'm fully aware of that. Okay.
yeah,
On the other hand, Iran doesn't have it, or like Iran's this harmless thing that, you know, oh, they're not going to hurt anyone. Okay, fine. Hypothetically, let's say that is the entire truth. Okay. Then if Iran don't have nukes, why the fuck for this entire time have they been making threats that,
yeah,
oh, we're going to nuke so and so? Not just externally, but internally. We were in fucking school that our teachers would come up and say to us, "Oh yeah, one day we'll bomb the West. One
yeah,
day we'll destroy Israel." Well, Iran would never be able to nuke America. Okay, it's just not physically possible because if you want to use nukes, you need to send it off first. Okay, so
sure, of
that's just
course,
never going to happen. So that's also something that I noticed a lot of American politicians were kind of not really acknowledging. Okay, and they were kind of doing their Iraq textbook, which I did notice that. I'm aware of that.
yeah, yeah,
But also at the same time, why are Iran constantly making threats then? If you don't have nukes, why are you constantly making threats that you're going to fucking destroy a country? You're not really helping your own case here. And
no,
just as a result, creating a war that the fucking people on the ground who've got nothing to do with it are dragged into, which is
yeah,
exactly what's happened right now, both
yeah.
sides.
I mean, they've been saber rattling this for years. I mean, the other thing about it is that the claim that you aren't, you know, enriching your depleted uranium or whatever it is. They claim that you're just doing it to create, you know, varied energy sources. I
Yeah.
think it's just quite yeah, I mean, it's for a regime that doesn't allow the energy resources that the country has to enrich their population. The idea that they're doing it to sort of enrich the country and the population is just, I think it's just patently nonsense. Of course, how far away they were, because I think it's called IPAC or IPASAC or something like this. The
IPAC.
Yeah, you know, the review board were saying there, X amount of, there's no exact proof as to the enrichment process. And they were saying, well, it could be, 1 year, 2.5 years away from the potential that this could happen, but there's still, you have to, there's so many other things. I mean, I'm not even going to try and get into it because I did a podcast about it, trying to explain my, pigeon understanding of the scientific process. But at the same time, I mean, you really, I think the idea that that's not what the Iranian regime were hoping to get hold of, I think is just incredibly naive,
I think so too. I fully agree with that, and I hope people from all sides will understand at least that part. The thing of it is that at least as to what information is available to us, so
Yeah.
let's say in the case of nuclear energy, the way that which I understand it is that you need to have, I think it's like over 90% enriched uranium if you want
Yeah.
to use it as a weapon.
Yeah.
Okay. And then I think it's something like maybe 40% or something like that if you want to use it as energy. And I think Iran was something
Like
like
30%.
68. It was at 68%.
Really? Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So not quite there, but also a bit above the threshold. So Iran's not near the weaponized aspect of it, but
Yeah, there's so many other things to
then
consider as
there's,
well.
but that's,
The ability to be able actually to send a missile with this, even in the warhead, and I mean, so many other things involved in it. But the idea, like I said, that they weren't, striving to attain that, I think, is kind of naive, really.
I think so. Yeah, yeah, I think so. And the thing I want to encourage people to do is to at least just be a little more observant instead of flying off the handle over the smallest thing. Okay. And some things, yeah, maybe upon observation, you will come to the conclusion that actually this was right. But I think one mistake that a lot of people make, and I think COVID really fucked this up in particular, because of the distrust in the establishment that it created.
Yeah.
So I've been through that myself. I have a very hard time fucking believing anything that I see now.
Same, yeah.
And especially with the development of AI and stuff,
Yeah.
that's something we've not even touched on. Even
No, you don't even know what could be a deep seek thing or something. You're watching. Yeah,
100%. And with all of that stuff happening, I think that the problem that's happened is that the alternative narrative is almost becoming equally as dogmatic as the mainstream one. So as soon as someone, like, let's say, as soon as Trump does something, it's like, oh, he went and kissed the wall and all of that, and it's like, yeah, I know he did, but there's maybe more to this than you can just conclude in a split-second decision to really think that, oh yeah, so he's doing this because he's done this and that, he's compromised, whatever. And by the way, who the fuck isn't compromised who's in any position of power? All right. And I'm not just sat here like singing Trump's praises or anything. He's actually done some very questionable things lately.
Yeah.
But what I'm just trying to say is, don't assume you fucking know everything
of course.
because you've been fed down a certain narrative.
I
so
think,
that's just kind of, I want to put that extra sense of skepticism in people's heads there.
Yeah, and that I mean, that's also part of the narcissistic nature of how people, sort of take in information. I had this argument all the time with my friends, and I say, if this was Obama sending in this bunker buster, you would feel less affronted by it, but because it's being done by, Trump, who you hate, but it's got nothing to do with you or how you feel. In fact, nothing has anything to do with you or how you feel. Your narcissistic tribal impulse, which is driving your reaction to these things. The only way you can rationally try and observe this is to try and set that aside and go, okay, well, let's look at actually what is happening here, stopping an Islamic theocracy, getting, the ability to launch a nuclear strike. Is that what we're talking about? If that's what we're talking about, then that could have been something that, any Western leader would be worried about. But again, I just understand that's not how things work. Like Trump could, no matter, I think for a lot of people, no matter what he does, they're going to react this way because they place their own emotional reaction at the center of the story. And that's just such a Western modern thing. Before we used to have a shared view of the news. Now everybody's phone is their own particular view of the news. I just think it's such a Western thing, such a narcissistic thing well, I feel this about how the bombing and whatever, something in the Middle East makes me feel is more important than, as you say, the actual truth of what's happening on the ground.
Yeah.
Rambling answer, rambling question, but
I 100% agree with you, man. I think that's a very good take. And one thing that I keep trying to remind myself, and I try and remind this to people around me, is the fact that the world will always take advantage of you based on the fact that you think you are special.
yeah, sure, yeah,
You know?
or whatever. Yeah, you're the tribal. Like I said, this sort of emotional impulse to your tribalism is being used to the advantage of the system itself, because it's playing your outrage, it's playing your anger, it's playing your altruism, it's playing all of these things, it's weaponizing your empathy, all these kind of things. And
Absolutely.
when we don't necessarily know all these things, that's why when I reached out to you, I said, "Yeah, man, we got to do a podcast about this kind of stuff," because." And I've been speaking to my friends in Israel as well, and just sort of like, well, what the fuck are you people hearing from your people, as opposed to
Yeah.
me listening to WhatsApp chat, people in a leafy suburb of South County Dublin going, well, I think this is shut the fuck up.
By the way, since you mentioned that, I like to bring this up as well. I have had people from Israel. I don't know how they keep getting my phone number, by the way, but they keep, I've had, like,
As long as you don't have a pager, you'll probably be okay.
I think so, yeah. No, but the thing is, like, I have had so many positive messages from people who are just civilians.
Yeah, of course. Yeah,
People who are there, like people who I've known from the scene, who've been around for
yeah,
many
yeah,
years, sending me messages from actual bomb shelters whilst Iran is sending rockets over.
yeah, yeah,
And they're sending me voice messages saying, "Hey, brother, this is
yeah,
where I am. I'm just here with my daughter. I hope your family back home are okay."
yeah,
You know how fucking cool that is? Like,
yeah,
and I appreciate that so much. Why do I mention this? Because it's important. One big mistake that I think a lot of the people who, not everyone, but a lot of people I notice make this mistake of just dehumanizing everyone.
yeah, yeah, totally. Yeah.
That you see a person the same as their government. These
Oh,
governments are not the same as their people,
this is exactly what we're arguing about today, is that the idea that a government's foreign policy represents them is just, this is just idiotic.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So it's like, just because, when Trudeau was in power, I didn't assume that every Canadian was a fucking communist or a
Yeah, yeah,
descendant of Fidel Castro.
yeah, yeah.
And
This is
you
true.
know, yeah, but that it's the same for Iran, and it is the same for Israel as well. I get that there's a lot of different people with different beliefs, but just like, there's, at the end of the day, there's human beings on the ground who just want to get on with their lives, and they
Yeah,
are absolutely, they're no different to you and I,
yeah,
okay?
and they don't want their children bombed. I mean, that's yeah. There you go. It's the bottom line.
No.
Yeah,